Far out in the wilderness, beneath the burning desert sun, the camp of Israel stretched across the land like a sea of tents. The people had recently escaped slavery in Egypt, and though they were free, many still struggled with fear and doubt. Moses often climbed the rocky slopes of Mount Sinai to speak with God, leaving the people waiting below in anxious silence. One evening, after many days on a mountain, Moses returned with a face filled with awe. Aaron hurried toward him. "What did the Lord say?" he asked quietly. Moses looked over the camp before answering. "God desires to dwell among his people," he said. The elders exchanged surprised glances. "The Holy One among us," one man whispered. Moses nodded slowly. "But we must prepare a sacred place for his presence." The people listened carefully, sensing that something extraordinary was about to begin. The next morning, Moses gathered the tribes together before the entrance of the camp. Men, women, and children stood quietly as he lifted his staff. "The Lord has given instructions," Moses announced. "We are to build a tabernacle, a holy dwelling place." Murmurs spread through the crowd as he continued speaking. "At the center of this holy place, there will be a sacred chest called the ARK of the Covenant." A young man frowned in confusion. "What will it look like?" he asked. Moses replied, "It will be made of acacia wood and covered entirely with pure gold." Gasps rose among the people. Gold was precious, especially in the wilderness. "And inside it," Moses continued, "will rest a covenant between God and Israel." An old woman clasped her hands tightly. "Then this ark will be a sign that God is truly with us," she said softly. Moses smiled gently. "Yes, his presence will dwell above it." Soon the camp became filled with activity, as skilled workers prepared for the sacred task. A craftsman named Bezalel was chosen for the work because God had given him wisdom and skill. Moses called him forward before the people. "The Spirit of God is upon you," Moses said. Bezalel bowed humbly. "I will do exactly as the Lord commands." Day after day, the sound of hammers echoed through the camp, while others brought offerings of gold, silver, fine cloth, and precious wood. Children watched with wide eyes as shining gold was melted and shaped carefully by skilled hands. One evening, Bezalel examined the carefully cut acacia wood and said to his helpers, "Every measurement must be exact. This is not for man. It is for God." His assistants worked carefully, afraid to make even the smallest mistake. The entire camp seemed filled with reverence as the ark slowly began to take shape. When the wooden chest was completed, Bezalel carefully covered inside and outside with pure gold until it gleamed brightly in the firelight. For golden rings were attached to its corners, and long poles were prepared so no human hand would touch the ark directly. But the most breathtaking part was still unfinished, the mercy seat. Bezalel shaped 2 golden cherubim with wings stretched wide toward one another. Their faces looked downward toward the center of the Arkansas. As the workers stared at the golden figures, silence fell over the tent. "It is beautiful," one helper whispered. Bezalel lowered his tools carefully. "This is where the presence of the Lord will rest," he replied softly. Moses later entered to inspect the work. He stood silently for several moments before speaking. "You have obeyed the Lord faithfully," he said. The craftsmen bowed their heads, overwhelmed by the honor of serving in such holy work. At last, the day came when the ark would be placed inside the tabernacle. The people gathered outside in complete silence as the priests carried the sacred chest using the golden poles. Thick curtains surrounded the most holy place where the ark would remain hidden from ordinary eyes. Aaron's sons looked nervous as they walked carefully forward. "Do not stumble," one priest whispered anxiously. Another tightened his grip on the pole. "The Lord is with us," he replied quietly. Moses himself guided them toward the inner chamber. Once the ark was placed beneath the shadow of the cherubim, Moses stepped back slowly. Suddenly, a thick cloud descended over the tabernacle, and the glory of the Lord filled the holy place with brilliant light. The people outside fell to their knees in fear and wonder. "God is truly among us," someone cried. And throughout the camp, hearts trembled as Israel realized the Ark of the Covenant was far more than a golden chest. It was a sacred symbol of God's presence with his people. From that day forward, the Ark of the Covenant became the most sacred object in all of Israel. Whenever the cloud of God's presence lifted from above the tabernacle, The people knew it was time to journey onward through the wilderness. The priests would carefully cover the ark with layers of protective cloth before carrying it ahead of the camp. One morning, as the trumpet sounded across the desert, Joshua approached Moses and asked, "Will the ark always lead us?" Moses nodded firmly. "Yes, it goes before us because the Lord himself leads his people." As the tribes packed their tents, many glanced toward the holy tabernacle with deep respect. Children whispered to one another, wondering what it must be like inside the most holy place. No ordinary eyes may look upon it. A father warned his son gently, "The ark belongs to the Lord." And so, with great care and reverence, Israel followed the presence of God through the endless wilderness. Years passed, and the wilderness tested the hearts of the people again and again. There were days of hunger, fear, and rebellion. Sometimes the people complained bitterly against Moses. "Why did you bring us into this desert?" Angry voices shouted. Yet, whenever Moses entered the tabernacle, he sought guidance before the Ark of the Covenant. One evening, after a difficult dispute among the tribes, Aaron entered the tent quietly beside Moses. "The people are restless," Aaron admitted. Moses sighed heavily. "They forget who walks among them." Suddenly, from above the mercy seat, the voice of the Lord spoke clearly within the holy place. Aaron immediately fell face down in fear. Moses listened carefully as God gave instructions for the nation. When they later emerged from the tabernacle, the people grew silent. They knew Moses had stood before the presence of the Almighty. Even in moments of rebellion, the ark reminded Israel that God had not abandoned them. After many difficult years, Israel finally reached the edge of the promised land. But one great obstacle stood before them. The Jordan River overflowed its banks with powerful rushing waters. The people stared at the river nervously. "How can we ever cross this?" some asked in fear. Joshua, now chosen to lead after Moses' death, stood before the priests carrying the ark inside. "Be strong," he told them. "The Lord will do wonders among us today." The priests exchanged uncertain glances, but obeyed. Slowly, they stepped toward the raging river with the ark upon their shoulders. The moment their feet touched the water, something incredible happened. The river suddenly stopped flowing and began piling up far upstream. Gasps spread through the crowd as dry ground appeared before them. "It is a miracle," a woman cried. Tribe after tribe crossed safely, while the priests remained standing in the middle of the river beside the Arkansas. That day, all Israel saw that God's power still moved with his holy covenant. Not long after crossing the Jordan, Israel came to the fortified city of Jericho. Massive stone walls surrounded the city, making it seem impossible to conquer. Soldiers stared upward nervously at the towering defenses. "How can these walls ever fall?" one warrior asked. Joshua gathered the people and revealed God's unusual command. "For 6 days we will march around the city once each day," he explained. "The priests will carry the ark before us." Some men looked confused. "No ladders? No battering rams?" they asked. Joshua shook his head. "We will obey the Lord." Early the next morning, the procession began. Priests carrying the ark walked solemnly while trumpets sounded through the air. The people marched silently around the city as the citizens of Jericho watched from above in confusion. Day after day, the strange march continued. But on the 7th day, everything changed. As the sun rose on the 7th day, Joshua's voice rang across the camp. "Today we march around the city 7 times. The people obeyed without question. Around and around Jericho, they walked while the ark remained at the center of the procession. By the 7th march, tension filled the air. The priests lifted their trumpets, waiting for Joshua's signal. Suddenly Joshua shouted, "Cry out, for the Lord has given you the city." Instantly, the priests blasted their trumpets, and the people released a mighty shout that echoed across the land. The ground began to shake violently beneath their feet. Cracks spread through Jericho's massive walls as stones collapsed in every direction. Dust filled the sky while terrified screams rose from inside the city. An Israelite soldier stared in disbelief. "The walls are falling," he shouted. The impossible had happened. With the Ark of the Covenant before them, Israel witnessed once again that victory came not through human strength, but through the power of God himself. After the victory at Jericho, the Ark of the Covenant remained at the center of Israel's worship and leadership. The people settled into parts of the Promised Land, and the tabernacle was eventually placed at Shiloh. There the Ark rested within the holy tent for many years. Families traveled from distant tribes to worship before the Lord. One young boy named Samuel often served in the tabernacle under the priest Eli. Late one evening, as the lamps flickered softly inside the holy place, Samuel looked toward the curtain hiding the ark and saw, "Is the presence of God truly there?" he whispered to Eli. The old priest nodded slowly. "The Lord speaks to his people from that sacred place." Samuel stared quietly at the curtain with awe. Though Israel now lived in the land God promised them, many people had begun drifting away from obedience. Corruption spread among the leaders, and Eli's sons treated the holy things carelessly. Yet the ark still stood as a reminder that God remained holy, whether his people honored him or not. One terrible day, war broke out between Israel and the Philistines. Israel's army suffered a crushing defeat, and fear swept through the camp. The elders gathered together in frustration. "Why has the Lord allowed this to happen?" One man asked angrily. Another suddenly said, "Bring the Ark of the Covenant into battle. Then God will surely give us victory." Messengers hurried to Shiloh, and soon the ark arrived carried by Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas. The moment the ark entered the camp, Israel erupted with loud cheers. "Now we cannot lose," soldiers shouted confidently. Across the battlefield, the Philistines heard the noise and trembled. "Their God has come into the camp," they whispered fearfully. But while Israel trusted in the ark itself, many had forgotten to truly honor God. The next battle became a disaster. Thousands of Israelite soldiers fell, and for the first time in history, the Ark of the Covenant was captured by enemies. When news of the defeat reached Shiloh, panic spread through the city. A messenger ran breathlessly to Eli, who sat trembling near the gate. "Israel has fled before the Philistines," the messenger cried. Eli closed his eyes in sorrow. "And my sons?" he asked weakly. "They are dead," the man answered. Eli's face turned pale, but then came the final terrible news. "The Ark of God has been captured." At those words, Eli gasped in horror and fell backward from his seat. The old priest died instantly. Throughout Israel, grief spread like wildfire. Women wept openly in the streets, while men covered their heads in despair. How could the ark be taken? People asked in confusion. Some feared God had completely abandoned them. But the Philistines were about to learn that the God of Israel could never be treated like an ordinary defeated idol. The Philistines carried the ark triumphantly into the city of Ashdod and placed it inside the temple of their god Dagon. Soldiers laughed proudly as they set the sacred chest beside the giant idol. "Dagon has defeated the God of Israel," one man boasted. That night the temple grew silent beneath the darkness. But the next morning, the priests of Dagon entered and froze in shock. Their massive idol had fallen face down before the ark and saw, "Lift it up quickly," the priests shouted nervously. They set the statue back in place and tried to ignore their fear. But the following morning, the scene became even more terrifying. Dagon had fallen again, but this time its head and hands were broken off upon the floor. Panic swept through the city. Soon strange sicknesses spread among the people, and many cried out in agony. "Send the ark away," terrified citizens shouted. "The God of Israel is fighting against us." Fear replaced their pride as the Philistines realized the ark carried the power of the living God. The Philistines moved the ark from city to city, hoping to escape the disaster surrounding it. But wherever the ark went, fear and suffering followed. In Ekron, the people cried out the moment they saw it arriving. "Why have you brought the ark here to kill us?" they shouted in terror. Finally, the Philistine rulers gathered together in desperation. "We must return the ark to Israel," one leader said firmly. Another asked nervously, "But how do we send it back?" Their priests advised them carefully. "Place the ark on a new cart," they said, "and send offerings with it to honor the God of Israel." 2 cows were tied to the cart, though they had never been trained for such work. The Philistine rulers watched anxiously as the animals began walking straight toward Israel without hesitation. "Look," one man whispered in amazement, "they are going directly to the land of Israel." And so, after months of fear and humiliation, the Ark of the Covenant finally returned to God's people once again. The people of Beth Shemesh were working in the fields when they looked up and saw the ark returning on the cart. Instantly, joyful cries filled the air. "The ark of the Lord has come back!" Men shouted as they ran toward it. Priests and elders gathered quickly, while sacrifices of thanksgiving were prepared. Many fell to their knees in relief and worship. But in the excitement, some men forgot the holiness of the ark and saw curious and careless. They looked inside the sacred chest. Suddenly, terror swept through the crowd as judgment fell upon them. Cries of fear echoed across the fields. "Who can stand before this holy God?" the people asked in trembling voices. Their joy quickly turned into dread. They realized the ark was not merely a symbol of blessing. It represented the holiness and power of God himself. Afraid to keep it any longer, the people sent messengers to nearby Kiriath-Jearim asking others to come and take the ark away. Men from Kiriath-Jearim soon arrived and carefully carried the ark to the house of Abinadab, which stood upon a hill. His son Eleazar was chosen to guard it with reverence and care. There the ark remained for many years, while Israel slowly turned back toward God. During this time, the prophet Samuel traveled throughout the land, calling the people to repentance. "Put away your false gods," Samuel urged them. "Return to the Lord with all your hearts." The people listened carefully, tired of fear and defeat. One evening, elders gathered around Samuel and asked, "Will God forgive us after all our failures?" Samuel lifted his eyes toward heaven. "If you seek him sincerely, he will not abandon you," he answered gently. The ark resting quietly at Kiriath-Jearim became a silent reminder that God's covenant still remained with his people, even after seasons of judgment and sorrow. Years later, a shepherd named David rose to become king over Israel. After establishing Jerusalem as his capital city, David began thinking deeply about the Ark of the Covenant. One night, while speaking with his commanders, he said, "How can we build a kingdom while the Ark remains far away?" His men nodded in agreement. "We should bring it to Jerusalem," one advisor replied. David's face brightened with excitement. "Yes," he declared, "the Ark must be honored in the city of God." Soon preparations began across the nation. Musicians gathered with harps, cymbals, and trumpets, while thousands of people prepared for a grand celebration. When the day arrived, the ark was placed upon a new cart as crowds sang and danced joyfully before it. David himself leaped with excitement before the Lord. The atmosphere was filled with music, laughter, and worship. But in the middle of the celebration, something terrible suddenly happened. As the cart carrying the ark traveled along a rough path, the oxen suddenly stumbled. A man named Uzzah quickly reached out his hand to steady the ark from falling. The moment he touched it, judgment came instantly, and Uzzah collapsed to the ground lifeless. The music stopped. Fear swept through the crowd as silence filled the road. David stared in shock and confusion. "How can this happen?" he cried out. The people backed away from the ark trembling. David's joy turned into fear. "Who can bring the ark of the Lord near me?" he asked quietly. Realizing they had not followed God's instructions properly, David refused to move the ark any farther. Instead, it was placed in the house of a man named Obed-Edom. For 3 months, the ark remained there. During that time, blessings overflowed upon Obed-Edom's household, and soon reports of God's favor reached David's ears. When David heard how greatly God had blessed Obed-Edom's family, his fear slowly turned back into determination. "We will bring the ark to Jerusalem," he said firmly, "but this time we will do it according to the Lord's command." Priests carefully sanctified themselves, and the ark was lifted properly upon their shoulders using the sacred poles. As the procession moved forward, sacrifices were offered every few steps. Music filled the air once again, but now the celebration was mixed with deep reverence. David danced before the Lord with all his strength, wearing simple priestly garments instead of royal robes. Crowds shouted joyfully as the ark finally entered Jerusalem. "Lift up your heads, O gates!" singers cried. "Let the King of Glory come in." Trumpets echoed through the city, while people lined the streets in celebration. At last, the Ark of the Covenant rested within a special tent prepared by David, and for the first time in many years, the symbol of God's presence stood at the heart of Israel once again. As the Ark rested in Jerusalem, David often entered the tent to worship before the Lord. Many nights he sat quietly with his harp, singing songs of praise while the priests tended the sacred place. One evening, David spoke with the prophet Nathan. "Look around," the king said thoughtfully. "I live in a palace of cedar, yet the ark of God remains inside a tent." Nathan listened carefully as David continued. "I want to build a great temple for the Lord." At first Nathan agreed. "Do whatever is in your heart," he replied. But later that night, God spoke to Nathan in a vision. The next morning, the prophet hurried back to David. "The Lord says you will not build the temple," Nathan explained gently. David lowered his head in disappointment. But Nathan continued, "Your son will build it, and God will establish your kingdom forever." Though saddened, David accepted God's decision humbly and began gathering materials for the future temple that would one day house the ark permanently. After David's death, his son Solomon became king over Israel. Solomon was wise, wealthy, and determined to complete the work his father had dreamed about. For years, thousands of workers labored in Jerusalem cutting stone and shaping cedar wood for the magnificent temple. Gold covered the walls, doors, and sacred furnishings until the entire building gleamed brilliantly in the sunlight. At last, the temple stood completed upon Mount Moriah. Solomon gathered the elders and leaders of Israel together for the great dedication ceremony. "Bring the Ark of the Covenant," he commanded. Priests carefully carried the ark into the temple, while singers and musicians filled the courts with worship. The people stood in silence as the ark entered the most holy place beneath giant golden cherubim. Then suddenly, a thick cloud filled the temple so powerfully that the priests could no longer stand to minister. "The glory of the Lord has filled this house," someone cried. The people fell to their knees in awe as God's presence rested once again above the ark. Standing before the altar, Solomon lifted his hands toward heaven and prayed for the nation. "Lord God of Israel," he said, "there is no God like you in heaven or on earth." The vast crowd listened quietly as his voice echoed through the temple courts. Solomon prayed that whenever Israel sinned and turned back to God in repentance, the Lord would hear them from heaven and forgive them. He also prayed for strangers from distant nations who would someday hear about God's greatness. "May all the peoples of the earth know your name," Solomon declared. When the prayer ended, fire suddenly descended from heaven and consumed the sacrifices upon the altar. The crowd gasped in fear and wonder. Priests fell face down while worshippers shouted, "The Lord is good. His mercy endures forever." For many years afterward, the temple became the center of worship in Israel, and deep within its holy chambers rested the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred sign of God's covenant with his people. But as generations passed, many kings after Solomon turned away from God. Idols were brought into the land, and corruption spread throughout the nation. Some kings honored the temple, while others neglected it completely. Prophets warned the people repeatedly, "Do not trust in the temple, while your hearts remain evil." Jeremiah cried boldly in the streets of Jerusalem. Yet many ignored the warnings. Enemies eventually rose against Israel, and fear spread throughout the kingdom once more. During times of invasion, priests likely hid the ark to protect it from destruction, though no one recorded exactly where it was taken. Some whispered that it had been hidden deep beneath the Temple Mount. Others believed faithful priests secretly carried it away before Jerusalem fell. When the Babylonian armies finally destroyed the city and burned Solomon's temple, the Ark of the Covenant vanished from history. No enemy displayed it as a trophy. No king claimed to possess it. The sacred chest that once led Israel through miracles and battles disappeared into mystery. Even though the Ark of the Covenant vanished, its story continued to echo through generations. Parents told their children about the golden chest that carried the covenant of God. Priests remembered the glory that once filled the tabernacle and temple. Prophets spoke of a future day when God himself would dwell fully among his people again. Centuries later, many still search for the lost ark, hoping to uncover its hidden resting place. Some believed it remained buried beneath ancient ruins, while others thought God had taken it away for his own purpose. Yet the greatest lesson of the ark was never about gold, power, or mystery. It was about the presence of God among his people. The ark reminded Israel that the Lord desired holiness, obedience, faith, and worship from those who followed him. Though the sacred chest disappeared from human sight, the covenant of God endured far beyond wood and gold. And through every generation, the The story of the Ark of the Covenant remained a powerful reminder that the presence of God is the greatest treasure anyone can ever seek. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the Golden Bible Story page on YouTube, follow on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. God bless you.